Hello and welcome back to the Movie Memo Recaps. Today we are going to recap a 1974 movie titled Death Wish. Please be advised that there will be spoilers ahead. In the opening scene, we are introduced to Paul Kersey, a New York architect, on vacation with his wife Joanna. After enjoying their vacation, Paul and Joanna return to New York, a stark contrast to the tranquil beaches they had previously explored. Paul soon returns to the office, where his co-worker informs him about the city's escalating murder rates, and he believes that a harsh solution such as concentration camps would be appropriate for hoodlums. Paul, on the other hand, has a different point of view and feels sorry for the impoverished. His co-worker refers to him as a liberal. Joanna and her daughter Carol are shopping at a local convenience store when three hoodlums start a commotion inside. Joanna and Carol purchase groceries intended for delivery. The three hoodlums keep a close watch on Joanna and Carol, then scrutinize the address she left with the groceries, which gives them a clue. The three follow Joanna and Carol back to their apartment complex and obtain admission. They approach the apartment door and knock, claiming to be carrying groceries, but when Carol answers it, the guys rush in and attack the women. The goons demand money from the women, but they only have $7. Because the ladies do not have money, the goons decide to collect another form of payment for their valued time. One man has his way with Carol, while another viciously beats Joanna on the head. As they hurry out the door, another man administers one more punch to her skull. Joanna then approaches the phone in a weak manner. Paul is at work when he receives a call from Carol's husband, Jack. Paul initially believes it is a marital issue, until he discovers that his wife and daughter are being taken to the medical room. Paul runs over to speak with Jack. Officer Charles meets them and informs Paul about the beating of his wife and daughter before departing. Paul is unable to obtain any information regarding the attack and nearly loses his patience with Jack before cooling down. He notices a nurse, but she pays little attention to him. A doctor soon arrives and informs the men that Carol has survived, but Joanna has unfortunately died. Soon after, Paul and Jack attend a funeral with an out-of-it Carol. Jack invites Paul back to their place, but he prefers some alone time. He says goodbye to Carol, who doesn't even recognize him. Paul takes one more look at Joanna's grave before walking away. A few days later, Paul goes to the police station and asks to speak with Officer Charles. Officer Charles approaches Paul and asks him to speak with the investigator in charge of his wife's case. Paul meets the investigator, and they sit and converse. He informs Paul that a few individuals at the shop remember the three men, but no one has been able to identify them yet. Jack has requested that they wait a few days before they can communicate with Carol, but Paul plans to speak with Jack. Before Paul leaves, the detective warns him that there is just a tiny possibility they will catch the men. Meanwhile, Jack is unable to touch Carol without triggering PTSD. That night, Paul looks out his window and witnesses some hoodlums breaking into a car. When he arrives at work the next day, he receives $20 in quarters and places it in a sock. His boss, Henry, then assigns Paul an assignment in Arizona, and Paul requests a week to respond. He goes to see Carol and is concerned that she is sleeping too much. He proposes that Jack take Carol to another doctor, but Jack explains that he is taking Carol out of New York for a while. He suggests that Paul should remain behind to avoid startling Carol. Paul is initially angered upon hearing this, but calms down and chooses to take up the project in Arizona to clear his mind. He exits and is walking back to his apartment when a man approaches him and demands money. Paul beats him with the coin sock and flees back to his apartment, shivering and having to pour himself a drink to calm down. He then takes out his weapon and proceeds to revel in the joy of his recent accomplishment. Paul travels to Arizona and meets Ames, a land developer, at the airport. Ames invites Paul out onto his property to examine what he is trying to do. He then transports Paul to a movie set where actors are reenacting a classic Western brawl. Ames eventually invited Paul to supper at a shooting club. Ames is amazed by Paul's handgun shooting on the target range. Paul explains that he was a conscientious objector during the Korean War, serving as a combat medic, and that his hunter father taught him how to handle firearms. However, a second hunter, mistaking Paul's father for a deer, fatally wounded the senior Kersey, forcing Paul's mother to pledge never to use firearms again. After a few weeks, Paul finished Ames' residential project, and the man is satisfied. He drives Paul to the airport and places a farewell gift in Paul's suitcase as a thank you for his work. Ames has grown fond of Paul, and he offers him a move to Arizona if he grows weary of New York. Paul flies home, and Jack joins him at the airport. Paul expected to see Carol, but Jack is afraid to tell him the truth. Eventually, he admits that Carol has slipped into a profound despair and is now catatonic. When Paul hears this, he becomes enraged and blames Jack for failing to care for his daughter, as well as cursing the doctors who surround Carol. They go to see Carol in a psychiatric institution, and Paul pulls her close to him and hugs her while she has a distant expression on her face. The hospital's insurance is about to expire, prompting the doctors to suggest Carol's commitment to an asylum. Jack becomes enraged, labeling his wife and Joanna as statistics on the police radar, and feels helpless. Paul returns home, where the photos from his holiday have arrived. He examines photographs of the love of his life. He opens his luggage and discovers the gift Ames left behind, a lovely revolver. That night, Paul goes for a walk through the city. When he is going through the park, he notices a stranger following him closely from a distance. The man rushed down on Paul and demanded money, brandishing a gun. Paul shoots the man in the gut without hesitation, fleeing before anyone can see him. He returns to his apartment, rattled, and vomits in the bathroom. Cops arrive at the scene of the robber's death from injuries the next day, revealing that he is a wanted felon. The following day at work, Henry arrives to approve the development project. Before leaving, he observes that Paul is looking much better, and Paul concurs that he feels better. Another night on the streets, Paul witnesses some men mugging a businessman. Paul walks calmly over to the armed men and quickly kills all three, chasing the last man and killing him. The cops quickly arrive and question the businessman, but he refuses to provide any information. Paul and Jack embark on a journey to visit Carol, who is currently receiving care from nuns in a Christian mental institution. Jack believes they should have fled the city long ago due to the violence, while Paul believes they should defend themselves and fight back. The police begin investigating the criminals' murders. Inspector Ochoa gathers the entire station and briefs them on the suspect they are looking for, fearing that the individual is on a revenge mission. Two hoodlums board a city train and begin peering up and down at the passengers. They arrive at a car, where they notice Paul reading his newspaper. The train soon stops and the other passengers disembark, leaving Paul alone in the car with the hoodlums. While one man acts as a lookout, the other attempts to rob Paul, but he calmly shoots both and exits the train before the cops arrive. The cops shortly arrange a press conference in which they denounce Paul's behavior and urge him to surrender to the authorities. The reporters question the decrease in street mugging since the vigilante arrived, but the cops deny it. Ochoa has obtained foodstuffs that the vigilante dropped during an incident, and he intends to narrow down the store using the sales receipt before running everyone's records in the region. Jack pays Paul a visit and is astonished by his pleasant demeanor while listening to music and preparing dinner and beverages. He wonders what's going on, but Paul tells him he can't mourn forever. Paul goes to a pub and purposefully flashes a large bundle of cash, attracting the attention of two hoodlums. The men trail Paul out of the store, and as he makes his way through the metro station, the thugs close in on him. The men approach Paul and pull knives, but Paul shoots one of them, killing him as the other escapes injured. He informs the police, who immediately pursue the culprit but lose Paul as he boarded the train. Paul returns home, discovers he was cut during the confrontation, and responds to his wound. Meanwhile, the individual who escaped is receiving surgery under Ochoa's supervision. The man, however, dies during the operation. The responding cop tells Ochoa that the man claimed to have cut whoever shot him. At home, Paul learns that the two men he shot and killed have significant criminal histories. Reports indicate that citizens are now taking action against criminals, as evidenced by an elderly woman who successfully fought off two criminals and a construction worker who nearly killed a mugging victim. Meanwhile, Ochoa is focusing on his suspects, reducing them to 14 and encouraging his team to uncover the vigilante. Ochoa meets with an officer who is particularly interested in Paul since he fits the criteria. When they watch Paul leave his building, Ochoa sends a cop to follow him. Meanwhile, Ochoa goes up to his apartment and requests that the janitor grant him access to Paul's room. He begins his search, discovering bloody bandages in the trash and numerous publications about the vigilante. He presents all of his evidence to the district attorney, who suspects Paul as the vigilante. The district attorney then unexpectedly instructs Ochoa to dismiss the case because they do not want a martyr on their hands. Despite their reluctance to disclose this information to the public, muggings have significantly decreased since his arrival, likely due to their concern about inciting more vigilantes. Instead, they want Paul to stop and potentially leave New York permanently. Ochoa is apprehensive but complies with the idea. Ochoa calls Paul at home to inform him that he is under police observation and under investigation. That same night, Ochoa has 3 officers rough up Paul and tell him they're looking for someone similar to his description. A detective and Ochoa station themselves outside Paul's apartment several nights later. Paul dresses up in an expensive suit and exits the apartment via the back exit. Ochoa dispatches the cop to contact Paul's residence, but he receives no response and reports back to him, who then departs. Paul goes to his office and retrieves his revolver. Ochoa arrives just as he is leaving, and he discovers that Paul has left the building. Three muggers ambush Paul as he strolls around the park, demanding his money. Paul waits a minute before unleashing on the goons. As he pursues a goon through the woods, Paul sustains a leg wound. Paul runs after the shooter. The assailant flees inside a warehouse to hide, but Paul, knowing the layout of the facility, ends up encircling him. Paul tells him to draw his gun, but he faints from blood loss, and the goon escapes. Officers dispatch Ochoa to the scene, where he converses with the first officer present. The man discovered Paul's gun on the scene and hands it over to Ochoa, who instructs him to pretend he saw nothing. Meanwhile, Paul is in the hospital, and Ochoa goes there to find him laying in bed. He offers to dispose of Paul's handgun in exchange for his permanent exile from New York City. Paul accepts the offer, and his firm agrees to move him to Chicago. Ochoa informs the reporters that Paul is a typical mugging victim, and that the vigilante is still out there. Paul arrives at Chicago Union Station by train. A company representative greets him, and then he witnesses hoodlums harassing a young woman. He excuses himself and assists her. As the hoodlums taunt him, Paul laughs and makes a finger gun gesture toward them. Thanks for watching. If you are new, don't forget to subscribe for more of these recaps. Until next time, have a nice day.